3, 2, 1. Donal Macaskill, you are the Chief Executive of Scottish Care and a human rights expert. Welcome to the Care Home Show.
Delighted to be here, Simon.
Really good to have you on the show today. So Donald, I always usually start the show with one particular question, and that's around so how did you get into the health and social world, if you like. Now, I know that your journey's been a little bit different, so I'm going to ask you, how did you end up being the Chief Executive of Scottish Care? Because I think that nicely segues into what we'll end up talking about today. So yeah, how did you end up as the Chief Executive of Scottish Care?
Okay. This might take the whole hour, but I'll try and be brief. There's a concept which is developed today called the kangaroo concept, and that is, whereas in the past we might have expected somebody to start out at the start of their career and still be in the same area of work by the end of getting the clock at retirement, a kangaroo is somebody who jumps from different things. Okay. Hopefully gaining skills as they go through that life experience and journey. And so I'm an example, a very old example of an old kangaroo. So I started at university not really sure what I was going to do. I did philosophy, I did theology, I did psychology and sociology, and was always interested in issues of human relationship and care and the way in which we relate, and interested in particular in psychology around issues of end of life, of death, dying, bereavement. So the theme had always been there, but initially I taught in university, I went into academia, and after a time I then went and worked in a project which was directly around enabling people to move from long stay institutions because they had a learning disability and had been housed there back into the community. And that was probably my first direct engagement with the whole gamut of health, social care, education, community services. And after a period of time working both there and nationally around health and social care, engagement, involvement, patient participation, I set up a human rights consultancy. And I ran that for just under 14 years, and that was both delivering in Scotland, the UK, and wider in Europe, and indeed internationally. And I'm not a lawyer, and I don't pretend to be one, though I've probably picked up a fair bit on the way. But for me, human rights provided that framework of understanding of ethics and morality within which all I had done before was set and found its place. As part of that consultancy, I did some work with Scottish Care, and I got to know the organisation and they got to know me. So when it came to applying to replace Ranald Mair, who had been the chief executive virtually since its inception, but was certainly known as Mr. Scottish Care, I offered myself, and they accepted, and I'm here.
And there you are.
Indeed.
And there you are, right, okay. So we'll definitely get into a lot of the human rights stuff. I know that's something that both of us are keen to explore together. But and we'll talk about kind of how the two worlds come together from a human rights perspective and the Scottish Care world. But most people, I'm sure, will know. But for anyone that's not clear, tell me, what does Scottish Care do?
Okay, so Scottish Care is a representative body, a membership body, and our members are those organisations who deliver health and social care predominantly to older individuals and adults, but increasingly actually those lines are being blurred. So we represent the independent care sector, so that means that our members might be not-for-profit, charitable or voluntary, or indeed they might be private providers. Two main sectors. One is care homes. So in Scotland, 89% of care home delivery is by the non-state providers, and we represent 98% of that group. Sure. And in terms of home care, particularly for older people, our members deliver just short of 60% of all the home care for older people in Scotland. So those are our main constituent memberships. We just have around about 450 members, and who are delivering just short of 1,000 services, the length and breadth of Scotland.
So it's quite a comprehensive view of the Scottish care sector. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, certainly for adults, we wouldn't pretend to be across children, young people, or mental health or addiction services. But certainly for older people, we would like to say and feel that we are representative of the spectrum of views of our membership, which clearly, as anybody who runs any membership organisation knows, there is as much diversity of view within that scope of membership as one might expect.
Of course, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I know that you're also part of the Five Nations Care Forum. Can you explain a little bit about the kind of the concept and the kind of underlying proposition, if you like, of the Five Nations Care Forum?
Okay, so the Five Nations Care Forum has now been going for 10 years. In fact, we're entering our 11th year, and it's a gathering together of the CEOs and chairs of the main representative social care bodies in the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. So organisations like Care England, National Care Forum, Nursing Homes Ireland, Care Wales, etc. So that gathering takes place twice a year, and it's an opportunity for senior staff and chairs to get together, to network, to share issues of common concern, to identify where there might be the potential for joint work, and to be a sounding board for each other, because as anybody who runs an organisation as a CEO knows, it can be a fairly isolating experience. And the benefit of gathering CEOs of membership organisations together is that we can share our intelligence and our insight and learn from one another. And though it's only twice a year, these have been immensely valuable experiences, and I think have helped all of the members in very diverse ways.
It's as a kind of a leader within a business, I can vouch for that particular thought. It's really valuable for me to spend other time with other business owners, whether they be care business owners or otherwise, because there's so much commonality in the challenges. Even before we were filming today, I was chatting to a friend of mine who runs a different type of business, and we just laid out kind of two similar sets of circumstances and just explored it and kind of dissected it a little bit. And I hope my friend got a little bit. I certainly got a little bit out of that conversation. But yeah, there's definitely, it's kind of an obvious statement, but there's definitely value in kind of that type of a collaboration when ultimately the five different nations are all experiencing probably much the same challenges. Obviously, it's going to be slightly nuanced and slightly different for your particular region that you're focusing on and things like that. But yeah, the sharing best practice and good ways to address the challenges is always never going to be a bad thing, isn't it? And it's a good bunch of people. I don't know everyone involved. I know Professor Martin Green pretty well, and I'm kind of building relationships with the other people. But a great crowd of people as well who are up to something quite special in their kind of respective organisations as well. So I know that. Scotland is basically running part of an integration programme at the moment. Now, this is obviously a very hot topic of conversation as we stand. Can you talk me through the programme? I know obviously it's a legal requirement, but can you talk me through the programme and what it is you're looking to achieve with the integration programme?
Okay, so health and social care integration is, as you rightly say, it's embodied in legislation in Scotland, and primarily it addresses both the primary and community care sector. So in simple terms, health and social care integration is focused around the person. It's about trying to ensure a commonality of pathway and approach for that individual person from the first point of contact that they may have with social care all the way to the end of life, whether that be in an acute hospital setting or indeed in the community, so that people shouldn't have to tell their story more than once.
Sure.
So there's a sense of a collective support and care, whether it's in the acute sector, in the primary care or in the social care sector, around the individual. That's not easy to achieve. And we are several years into health and social care integration. There are still significant areas which need further development, but we have learned lessons, I think. And one of, I think, the main lesson that I would, as a representative of the independent care sector, posit is the criticality of leadership, culture change and communication in that. I think it's fair to say, partly because of the way in which the legislation was drawn up, health and social care integration has become a statutory conversation at its worst, where those two statutory bodies have talked to each other with very little engagement of or inclusion of the independent, the third sector. That has absolutely skewed everything to being about health.
Sure.
And because of the nature of the NHS, its history, its reputation, its totemic status in society, we have lost sight of the criticality of social care in being able to ensure that pathway of continuity. What we have, I think, discovered is that leadership and the ability to bring people with you, the ability to challenge power bases where they exist, is critical for the success of integration. And that's not always happened. And I think we increasingly recognise that at the heart of that is a trust relationship. And there has been a trust deficit. And I've absolutely no doubt from my experience of hearing what's happening in England and Wales that those are the same lessons that are going to have to be painfully learned. That people hold on to what is theirs. They don't like sharing with others, whether they be other professionals or indeed, heaven forfend, the general population, their own professional guarded power base. That needs to change for health and social care integration to work and for it to achieve its aim of being focused around the citizen.
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, there's two ways in which it impacts the citizen. There's the actual care pathway itself, but then also the public purse as well, because usually the opportunities of collaboration between those two worlds, often it's far more economically sound for that person to be in a care environment than in a healthcare environment, and that can only be a good thing. So, as you say, it's got to come from the top, it's got to come from leadership, it's got to come from cultural transformation. That will only come through a change management process. But broadly, what we're talking about from the public first perspective is we're talking about a reallocation of the resources, financial resources available. Because I think from the people that I speak to, and I speak to an awful lot of people about this particular subject, is the fact that the money's there, it's just not being used as well as it might be, let's say, and people end up suffering because of it, which is, and that's fundamentally that's something that it's a tough nut to crack. We can sit here and kind of talk about the kind of the dynamics and things a bit, but we're talking about a seismic shift ultimately, aren't we, in culture?
And it will take time, and it's the change from the arithmetic of reaction to the arithmetic of prevention. So, we know it costs typically $2,800 to keep somebody in an acute hospital bed for an average length of stay between 3 to 5 days. That brings huge negatives in many, and that's untreated. That's not receiving treatment. So that individual who is in hospital, often on an unplanned and on an unnecessary basis, would be much better supported and cared for in their own home or in a care home which was appropriately resourced at a much cheaper cost. But finance shouldn't be, even though it importantly is the main driver here. It is the quality of life of individuals, which obviously as soon as you enter into a hospital post-treatment deteriorates and becomes a very unhealthy place to be. We need to keep people healthy where they are best, which is where they are at home, whether that's in a care home or indeed their own home.
What have been the learnings so far from the integration process that you've kind of seen and that you'd like to be able to share?
Okay, I think there are things like follow the money. Resource is critical. If people are being ultra defensive and holding on to a resource, then you need to know why and remove the blocks and barriers so that that resource can move from the acute setting into the community where we need to deliver care and health much more proactively in a preventative way. Secondly, I think we need to really put some flesh in terms of what collaboration is all about. It's not two systems talking to each other. It's inclusive of all those who are engaged, and that critically is the independent, the third sector, and people who are informal carers. So they have to be at the table. There are 5 voices at that table. There shouldn't just be 2, health and statutory social care.
Sure.
I think the third thing I've already referred to is leadership, but leadership in a dynamic way, which goes from the top to the bottom. The frontline carer, the nurse, the social care worker in a care home, the home care worker, is as critical to the leadership of health and social care integration as is the chief officer or the chief finance officer of a health board or a health authority. And I think lastly, it is the sense that change is a dynamic. It's not a static experience. And one of the things I think that has held Scotland back is the sheer rate of personnel change. So you build relationships which are critical to that resource reallocation, to that leadership, to that culture change. You build relationships at a personal level, and then somebody moves on.
Sure.
And you're back at the beginning. When that's simply a matter of you relating to somebody else, then that's understandable. But when that individual is representative of a whole system, then that becomes problematic.
Yeah, of course. Because the positive change that you're looking to try and support with the integration process, effectively, maybe it doesn't start from kind of square one, but it's not going to be anywhere near as developed just because of the relationship isn't there in the first place. So,
absolutely.
I think we're very much in agreement around. We're both obviously passionate about the cultural aspect of what we're talking about, and the fact that it does ultimately come from. It has to come from from a leadership perspective, but then it needs to transcend the organisation. Everybody needs to play their part in ultimately in the transition that needs to be had. So, and what do you think that other countries can learn from the Scottish programme?
The things I've just said about changing the system so that everybody's included around the table, that decisions made for people are made by people. So I think the independent care sector in particular is sick to the back teeth of the pretense of collaboration, engagement and involvement, which may exist at senior statutory level and certainly exists at a political level, but at ground level, where decisions are made around contracts, around commissioning, around how you deploy the workforce, there is no collaboration. So, to use as an example, there's very little point, as Scottish Government has just engaged in spending millions of pounds in a multi-purpose advertising campaign to recruit social care staff. If all of those individuals are going to be individuals who go into the statutory social care sector, leaving the independent and the third care sector depleted as a result, there needs to be greater collectivity, collaboration, engagement and involvement in reality, not just in paper. So that would be my first lesson. If you're wanting to be serious about this, learn the lesson that you need to have the right people in the room.
Sure.
You need to empower them to be able to have the conversation. You need to listen to them rather than just be tokenistic. And then you need to lead. And sometimes leadership at a political level means hitting heads against each other. And the overt protectionism and power play between local and central government, between health and social care is selfish, it's damaging and it's dangerous.
I think that last point that you made there is really, really critical, the fact that it is selfish and it's dangerous. Again, people are unnecessarily suffering because of the way that ultimately the kind of arrangement is set up as at the moment. So it's important work that you're obviously that you're doing at the moment. Keep pushing. I know it's not a battle that you're going to step away from anytime soon. But yeah, I think the various different members of the Five Nations Forum are all kind of banging a very similar drum to make sure that the system works again for the people, but then also for the public purse as well, which. It still baffles me, the fact that you've got these two incredibly important driving forces that just don't seem to be recognised. But yeah, so thank you for explaining that. So I know that technology is something that you're deeply passionate. How well do you think as a sector, how well do you think we deal with kind of the adoption of technology, if you will?
I think as a sector, social care is very open is very innovative and extremely entrepreneurial when it comes to technology. And that's despite the very real challenges which exist. And the primary challenge is resource. It's inevitably going to be the case that in an emerging field like technology, you are going to get new technologies which will be here today and gone tomorrow. And one of the challenges in a very resource-constricted environment, and social care is certainly such an environment, is the fear that you invest wrongly, that you purchase a system which isn't going to be relevant to your business needs and your organisational needs 2 years' time or 3 years' time. So there are very practical reasons why I think in some instances there's a resistance, and it's about economy of scale. Larger providers and operators can take some of those risks. If you're a sole business, or if there are only 2 or 3 care homes in your group, you're going to be much more cautious and reticent about buying into new technology. So I think in general there's an openness. I think we have to appreciate, however, that there are real sensitivities around the role of technology in the delivery of personal and human care. And so what Scottish Care has attempted to do is to frame some of the technology discussion and debate within that human rights context. And we've launched a human rights charter with partners who are software, hardware developers, people who use services, ethicists, human rights workers, to try to start a conversation whereby we start to think about, well, what is the role of technology? Now, for me personally, I'm an advocate in seeing technology as an assistant, as something which is enabling of human care and contact. But I will absolutely personally resist instances where technology is seen as the salvation which replaces the human, that somehow or other technology can replicate human engagement, encounter and relationship. It can add value, it can do and undertake tasks which perhaps are mundane and unnecessary. But as soon as we start thinking about technology as being the way in which we save lots of money by replacing human presence, then I think we get into a very dodgy ethical and moral territory.
Yeah, I'm definitely in agreement with the latter points there. I think it's interesting. I don't think I've ever met anyone. Maybe this is just the kind of the group of people that I spend my time with. I don't even from some of the kind of even kind of in the robotics world and things like that. A lot of the technology providers, everyone that I speak to seems to be of the opinion that very much of a similar opinion to yourself and myself as well. And the fact that you can't replace human interaction, you can't replace that type of thing with technology. So it's I guess I've never been presented with a piece of technology that's claimed to be able to change that interaction, but it's something that's obviously in the mindset of the sector very much, and I think it's too risky to risk if you like trying to emulate that type of real world care.
Personally don't have a problem, and I would agree. I haven't met any designer who wants to design the human out of the encounter and the engagement. But I have met plenty commissioners. I've met plenty contractors and those who draw up contracts who seem to think that technology can be this panacea which replaces the shortage of, or meets the issue of the shortage of workers, and who use technology as a means which is demeaning. And perhaps the classic example of that is the way in which electronic call monitoring is used in the home care sector. So the designers of this technology would pretend and claim that it is the use of the technology which negates the individual's capacity, which treats them as some sort of electronic tagging individual. So it's not technically the fault of the technology, but it is the fault and the complicity and the responsibility of those who use it in such a way that it causes distress and results in people leaving the social care sector as workers.
Yeah, that makes sense. kind of at the other end of the spectrum, if you like, what types of technologies are you getting excited about from what you've seen? Kind of anything that's emergent or anything that's particularly impactful that you've seen?
I think it's really difficult actually to keep up to date, such as the pace and the rate of innovation. And indeed, Scottish Care is delighted that Scottish Government has given us a resource to appoint an individual to take the lead for us in this role, to help providers, to help challenge the embedding of human rights in an ethical framework. Because you're right, everybody has broadly the same intention. I think there are clearly bits of technology which, not least smart devices, and the way in which we can use what people already have. And I think that's going to be the story of the next 5 years, is less design and innovation in terms of the new gadgets and new gizmos, but utilising the commonplace and the ordinary experience, the things that people have, not least in their homes or in care home settings. But it is very much, technology which is able to map changes in hydration or mobility, technology which is able to give greater assurance because it provides autonomy whilst tracking an individual, technology which is able to connect people up in relationship so that rather than be isolated in their own home or in a care home, they can maintain contact, technology which enables people to relive memory, to get in touch with their past. And I suppose some of the excitement that I've seen is that technology that helps people at the end of life to regain communication ability, to keep in contact with family and friends. So there are huge areas of potential, but I think it'll be less about the new and more about how we use what we have in our experience. But that in itself raises question. Who has access to the data? Who controls this? I think in Scotland we're doing some really interesting work around citizen-led and citizen-controlled data to break down those barriers between health and social care systems. But the way we do that will be critical. And for me, it has to be framed in a human rights perspective.
So let's talk about that. Okay, so I know that you've got a particularly strong interest, obviously, with your background around human rights-based technology. For avoidance of doubt, explain exactly what that means. Yeah.
So when I came to work with Scottish Care, I was very explicit with the executive and the appointing committee in saying that my intention was to continue my human rights work within the environment. Now, human rights at a popular level, perhaps particularly outside Scotland, is seen as either a tick box exercise or a set of principles which are for the other person. At its best, that's about being concerned about the human rights of individuals in countries which are developing, where they are much and more visibly abused rights. People are tortured, people are killed, people are not treated in manners which are dignified. It becomes much more challenging when you think about, well, what do the human rights of a Scot or an Englishman or a Welsh woman, what are they in the context of care? For me, and it's probably taken a long time in life for me to see that human rights, both legally, morally and ethically and philosophically, provide a framework around which I can understand human interaction. Because in essence, I always use the analogy that the modern human rights framework is rooted in the horrors of the Second World War and the years before and after. And the gathering together of the leaders of the world, led particularly by the British and the British Civil Service in 1948 in New York to frame the United Nations Charter on human rights, was a desire not to repeat those lessons of inhumanity, a desire not to go back, but to try to frame what it means to be human in relation to people who are different from you. And so for me, human rights haven't ultimately to do about the letter of the law, though legal recourse is extremely important, and I wouldn't want to diminish that. But they have primarily to do with human relationship. And how can we together create a society, a community, a nation which has a set of principles and values based around the dignity and the inherent worth of a human individual. That, in the care context, I think provides a framework like no other. So it's not about compliance. It's not about ticking the box. It's about changing the conversation, having the citizen at the centre, and not just in letter, but in intention and in action. So what does it mean for the person who is being supported and cared for to be the controller of that, to be the enabler of that care, especially in instances where with dementia they may have no capacity. So whether it's human rights as a framework for the use of technology, or human rights as the basic principles for the new national care standards in Scotland, or human rights projects which Scottish Care has been doing in care homes around the country, which have to do with language or communication, or looking at what it means to have privacy, or what it means to exercise your right as a sexual individual. Human rights offer a different way of tackling some difficult situations. It's like putting on a different set of glasses. It gives a different worldview. And it's challenging, but it inevitably involves talking, learning, listening, conversation, and reflection. And that, I think, makes it useful.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for the way that you explain that as well, because I think you put that in context. This is obviously an area of expertise for you and something that you're immensely passionate about. So you're more well versed than this, than most, I would say. How well versed are we as a sector when it comes to human rights, and how? Let's ask that question first. Okay, so how well versed do you think we are as a sector when it comes to dealing with human rights as a whole?
I suppose I can only probably speak about Scotland, though I am aware of what's happening in some elements in England. I think in Scotland we are getting better. I think there are still many frontline workers who see this as something that they think they need to know about because it's in a training course or it's part of their registration, but maybe haven't made the link between what human rights mean for the relationship I have with the person that I'm caring for. The new national care standards in Scotland are human rights based. The language of human rights is becoming fairly commonplace. I do worry that the rhetoric of human rights fails to live itself out in the reality of delivery. I think we're aware of that, and Scottish Care, for instance, with partners, is trying to embed more innovative approaches so that this isn't seen as the latest health and safety or a new system, but is a different way of understanding what we're doing. Because whether it's the person holding somebody's hand in the last few minutes of their life, who appreciates the individuality of that person, their uniqueness, their cultural, their religious heritage, and is sensitive to that. Whether it's the individual who gives choice and autonomy to somebody living with dementia, who maybe wants to exercise a decision against the will of their family. Whether it's somebody who is simply helping an individual plan for their support and care. Human rights as a framework, if properly used, offers that different perspective and gives a new language for understanding difficult situations. So I think we're getting better. We can be much better than we are. I think in the rest of the United Kingdom, because of, dare I say, a political cynicism around human rights, there is a lack of understanding. But bodies like the British Institute for Human Rights and many others are challenging that, and I would include CQC in that, because human rights isn't somebody's political possession. Human rights are international, global, and because of that, they belong to all of us.
Yeah, definitely. How, or rather, what can operators do to improve their approach to human rights?
I think become informed, become aware of the potential. There's lots of materials out there. Scottish Care, together with the Scottish Human Rights Commission, worked on a Care About Rights project, which is a very practical project that introduces workers and managers and staff to using tools which can raise the profile of human rights but also tackle some issues. The British Institute of Human Rights has done work in this area as well. So there are an increasing number of resources out there. In Scotland, Life Changes Trust, in their work through dementia, is developing resources and materials to help care home providers think about human rights. So become informed, ask, talk, share, and make this not an added extra, but make it the centre, the raison d'etre of the way in which you are caring.
And obviously, you've highlighted a couple of resources there. Are there any other things that people should be googling? Anything kind of areas that people should explore to kind of find them, help them on their journey of kind of informing themselves, if you will?
I think there are organisations, and I've mentioned, for me, the Care About Rights material is probably still the best material out there. It's free to download, it's accessible, it starts you thinking. The British Institute of Human Rights have also developed some good resources as well. So there's no shortage of material, but it's like anything else. In a previous incarnation, I used to work with organisations developing policies around human rights and equality. That's the wrong way to start. You need to start thinking, what are the human rights questions facing me as an organisation? What does a frontline worker experience in her daily work, which might impact human rights? As an organisation planning in the vision of our organisation and our future, what are the human rights questions that we need to think about? What sort of community, organisation, vision, philosophy? That's where you need to start. And human rights provide the framework, the hanger on which to hang things. But you need to start asking the questions first.
Sure. And just for my own benefit, just as much as anything else, you mentioned the latest piece of research, the one that you were advocating. What should people Google if they're interested in reading that piece of information? So the Care for Rights, was it?
So Care About Rights, if you just type Care About Rights Scotland, you'll come across the material, which is both available on the Scottish Human Rights Commission website and the Scottish Care website.
Got you. Okay, great. Thank you for explaining that. I know another subject that you're immensely passionate about is the workforce, and I know that you're doing a big program on the workforce. Tell me about what does that include? So
Workforce Matters is a project which is now entering, I think from memory, probably its 8th year, and it's funded by Scottish Government. It enables us to employ an individual, my colleague Caroline, who focuses on the whole range of workforce issues as they impact on the social care sector. It's funded by Scottish Government. And that's everything which your listeners and viewers will very much be aware about. It's about how do we recruit more and more individuals into the sector with an ageing workforce and a workforce which is 86% female in Scotland. How do we diversify that workforce? How do we hold on? The real challenge, I think, is how do we hold on to workers in an environment where they have to be registered, are increasingly professional, have qualification criteria attached to them. How do we enable social care not just as an entry-level job, but to see social care as enabling them of a progression and a pathway? But if I come back to what I said at the beginning, I described myself as a kangaroo jumping between jobs. We have to be increasingly open to the fact that we are going to have more women and men enter social care later in their lives. And that's great because they will hopefully have developed the maturity and insight of their years and an emotional maturity, which we can really utilise. But I think the greatest challenge for us in social care is to trust our workers, to give autonomy, control, to embed our professional trust in individuals. Because if we simply treat social care workers the way in which we treated them 20, 30 years ago, we are not going to hold on to this profession. These are going to be women and men who are going to have to become more comfortable with technology, who when they enter your house or your room in a care home are going to be able to read what the smart devices are saying to them about what's been happening. They're going to be individuals who are going to have to be much more confident in using visual stimuli and utilising tools which make the care experience different from what it is. We need to trust these women and men. We need certainly to pay them better, and that's what people like me are continually arguing for. Our workforce programme has helped us to do specific pieces of work around palliative and end-of-life care, around, at the moment, my colleagues working on the challenge for managers and supervisors. How do we hold on and nurture the next generation of leaders in social care? So I think it's inevitable that we continue to do as much as we can to give confidence to our members around workforce issues.
Mm-hmm. So that's Workforce Matters. That's the program that you've been doing. And so, what have you seen from running the Workforce Matters program? What are the kind of the insights and things that you can share from doing that?
I think some of them I've just hinted at, that we've got to recognise the changing nature of workforce, that the social care worker of tomorrow is not going to be the social care worker of yesterday. We have to recognise the increased professionalism and the increased skill base, particularly as the acuity and level of need of those who are receiving paid social care changes. So, 10 years ago, the average person moving into a care home would have literally walked into the care home. That's no longer the case. That person is assisted by one mechanism or another. So the palliative and end-of-life care needs are paramount. People are staying in care homes for less, and as the years go by, that period of time will become even shorter, and we need to recruit workers who are able to deal with people at real points of transition, where communication is depleted, where challenging behaviour as a result of condition increases. So I think some of the lessons we have learned is certainly the changing nature of the role, the professionalism of the role, the need to develop new skills. I think at the same time our project has also highlighted the factors which influence people either to stay or to leave. And those, yes, have to do with terms and conditions, but they have to do with autonomy, with trust. They have to do with being supported in terms of your own mental health and well-being. So one of the other pieces of work that I'm involved in with colleagues is I'm honoured to chair a national coalition drawing up bereavement standards for Scotland.
Okay.
So we know that emotional fatigue and distress and burnout around bereavement and the continuing encounter with people in a distressing stage of life impacts on our workers. We have to get better at supporting them, and that's at organisational and at national level. So we've had lots of insights around particular pieces of work, but we're still learning. Because this is a sector which changes every day, and as a representative body, Scottish Care has to change every day.
Of course. I think from a team member perspective, largely it's about how people feel about how they feel about their work, about their professional life. Because if you don't feel great about work for whatever reason that might be, then you're not going to show up to work in the way where you're going to be your best. You're going to be your best self, so, and if you're not your best self, then how are you ever going to look after people to? So
we can do something about that internal stuff and about helping our managers and others improve in that. But it's behoving on the rest of society to create a status for social care workforce, which is not where we are at the moment. So I want to get to a stage at which if I go to a pub or go to a party, somebody is proud to say that they're a social care worker instead of embarrassingly, I'm a care worker. I'm just a care worker.
Yeah,
exactly.
That old chestnut. It's one of those things that you hear all too often. I think I think I've had broadly this conversation with probably 4 or 5 different people in the last few weeks. But there's the wonderful story about when JFK was going round one of the NASA space stations, and he went around kind of asking everyone, okay, so what do you do? And the janitor turns around and says, we're putting a man on the moon, sir. And it's that passion, it's knowing, having a group of people who are working together to achieve a common goal, and everyone knows that they're contributing that towards the kind of the strategic objective, the vision and things like that. So you'd love to hear somebody say, I'm a superhero care worker, and that start telling you about a kind of impassioned story about the lives and things that they change. But coming back to our earlier point, it's about how people feel about their role, which I think is important, and obviously there's a seismic shift there that needs to happen there as well. And I would kind of argue the case that that's very much a cultural thing as much as anything else.
And it's a political thing. So the person who is the cleaner, the domestic, the cook in a care home is just as important as the individual who is holding somebody's hand at the end of life.
Of course.
So, but we don't mirror that statement with the reality of resource. So in Scotland, we pay frontline care workers the real or the Scottish living wage, but we give the minimum wage to those who are in non-direct care roles. What does that say about the quality of the totality of that experience?
Sure.
Because that domestic is making life better for that woman, just in the same way that the janitor is helping the NASA scientist get that man on the moon.
Absolutely, absolutely. So from a cultural perspective, I mean, it's obviously very important for care business operators to invest both time and money into their culture. First question, how important do you see culture as being for the care sector from an operational perspective?
I think you cannot value culture as any higher than it needs to be. When you ask somebody who's a family member why did they choose this care home as opposed to another, which they might have visited, what they usually say was it felt right. And they will probably find it quite difficult to then move on from that statement to articulate what it is.
Yeah.
But when you dig down, they'll say things that people were smiling. People feel as if they were wanting to be here. The residents were happy. They were engaged. There was activity. They weren't all sitting around in a circle. People were known by their first names. There was a good atmosphere. Now that's culture. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because that organisation is well led, well managed, there's a clear vision, that everybody is treated with equality, that people are trusted, that workers are given autonomy, that there's no false hierarchy, that there's a shared leadership and a collective sense of care embedded in that care home. So that does not just happen. It has to be worked at.
Sure.
And I've been privileged to meet some amazing leaders and have worked with some amazing leaders. And I'm often asked, what's your model of leadership? And for me, it goes back to, I'm a bit of a classicist, and language intrigues me and words intrigue me. And for me, my model of leadership is the midwife. And it comes from the Greek term, the maieutic. Okay. And so if you think of a maternity member of staff or a midwife, she or he is not there to do the birthing. That's the woman's responsibility. And as a man, I say, thank goodness. It's the woman's responsibility. But she is there, or he is there, the midwife, to provide the framework, the structure, the support that enables that experience to be as positive as it can be and for the birth to take place. So it's a reassuring words, it's a physical presence, it's a holding hands, it's a giving structure, it's an intervention if necessary. So it's not a passive thing. Leadership is not about being passive and laissez-faire and letting go. It's intervening when it's necessary. It's taking action when it's necessary. It's being clear about the vision. That's what a good care home requires. Not totalitarianism, the owner, the manager knows best, but a collective sense that the focus is the birthing of a positive experience for the resident, even if it is just the last few days of their life that they happen to be a resident with you. We owe it to people to give them the best possible death. We owe it to ourselves to create the best possible environment. And yes, resource is critical for that. But I have been in impoverished care homes with inadequate resources, which have delivered amazing care. And I've also been in care homes dripping with resource, where, to be quite frank, something is missing.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. Culture, how you make people feel, how people show up, the behaviours of a team. That's not a cost thing. Again, it's a leadership thing. It's a culture thing. It's the team working together to achieve that common vision, that common goal, and having that kind of collective view, as you say. And this isn't a money thing. It's not an investment. It's about building the culture from the inside out to make sure that you're looking after your team, so that your team can look after your residents or whoever it is that's kind of the beneficiaries of your service, if you like. So. What do you see as being the biggest things that operators of care business can do to build like a high performance culture or the right culture in their organisation?
I think with all things is to recognise that it's important in the first instance. If you don't think culture, if you don't think the ethos on the environment is important, and that you're more concerned about the practicalities of, how can I ensure that I'm getting best value for food purchase or energy purchase, and you don't pay attention to management and leadership and culture change, then you'll never make that journey. I would always say to particularly people new into the sector, go and visit a whole range of care homes. Be a busybody and find out, because that will teach you what you want and what you don't want. But critically, I would ask you to ask those who know best. And that is those who are frontline workers, frontline nurses, and those who use services in their families.
Yep.
Because if you get it right for them, then you'll get it right for yourself. And I would ask you to ask your family, what would you want? I know there's been lots of campaigns in the past to try to imagine what you would want. But for me, I don't know, is there a possibility that I might end my days in a care home or receiving care and support? But I hope if that happens, it will be at the hands of staff in an organisation who have me at the centre of their concern, who are aware of my uniqueness, who appreciate my individuality and change the way they work to fit that. I think at times, and if I'm being completely honest, we have far too many instances of an off-the-shelf care delivery. Instead of recognising that person-centredness isn't just a term for the moment, but it involves the changing of what we deliver to be moulded around the needs of the person. And that becomes person-led care, rather than expect that individual to take what we've got to give, because that's all that's available.
Absolutely. And some of you may have already answered this, but if you were to give somebody looking to make a positive impact on the care sector, just one if you were to give them one piece of advice, what would that one piece of advice be?
Ask questions. And when you hear the answers from those diverse people, listen. And I've experienced a lot of and worked with a lot of psychotherapists and psychoanalysts, and I think there is a huge difference between listening and hearing. Hearing really enables us to hear the sounds between what people are saying, what goes unmentioned and unarticulated. That's the art and skill of somebody who is a good listener. If you're delivering care, you need to be a good listener. You need to listen to what people are expressing and not expressing. You need to listen not just with your ears, but with your eyes, and to understand that people don't just communicate verbally, they communicate by their whole bodies. And if you do that, both in terms of your business, your interaction with others, then I think you will deliver a better service. And if I think of some of the pioneers and the experts in delivering care, they're people who stand out as being exceptionally authentic individuals. And authenticity, that sense of being true to yourself, doesn't happen by accident. It's something which most of us work our lives to try to achieve.
I think that's a great piece of advice. And from your own perspective, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received personally?
Try to, every day, spend time not thinking about your job.
Okay. Interesting.
And that's about self-love. It's about self-preservation. Whatever that thinking is, whether it's be watching the telly, being with people who are important to you in your life, going for a walk. I'm lucky in that I live 2 minutes from a beach. Even in storms, a wonderful place to be. I think care can be all-consuming. And it's understandable, because we're dealing with human beings. We're not dealing with creating widgets. We're hopefully helping people to live the fullest of their lives. But you need to look after yourself. So the best advice, and I'm not saying I necessarily take it all the time, the best advice is you can't give what you don't feed yourself with. You need to look after yourself.
So it's all about getting that balance right,
Yeah.
making sure that you're in the best place possible to look after people.
Yeah.
I think that's a wonderful piece of advice. So, Donald, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you
been
so
a
much for
pleasure.
having you on the Care Home Show.
Thank you, Simon.